Hello, this is Eric Thompson. I am CEO and founder of Peerless Wealth, a registered investment advisory firm headquartered and located in Columbus, Ohio. Thanks as always for joining. This video, let's do a fire drill. If you remember from grade school, it was actually kind of fun because every so often you'd hear the buzzer and they'd let you out into the playground for 5, 10, 15 minutes and they'd do a fire drill. Well, why would they do that? It's to give you practice in case a real one's happening so that you don't panic when one happens and that you get through it. And I think it's timely to talk about that now with investing. We just finished, I'm doing this video in January 2026, and we just finished another really strong year with the broad equity markets. The S&P 500 did, I believe, 18% last year. The small caps a little bit lower, international a little bit higher. And really that's the third year in a row of similar performance. The last 3 years combined for an all equity portfolio is likely greater than 50%, which that's more like a 5-year number, not a 3-year number. So we've definitely got potentially a bit ahead of ourselves, and we've had a little bit of above average returns, which is a lot of fun. But I think it's important to talk about this fire drill before we're in one, because oftentimes when there's some news event or some catastrophe going on, it's sometimes hard for people to be patient with the plan and realize that that's part of investing. Fire drills, they're not about panic, they're about preparation. So nobody runs screaming when something unexpected happens. Market declines are not rare, they're not abnormal. They're actually the price of admission for long-term investing. The problem isn't volatility, the problem is how people react to that volatility. And so I'm gonna go through a couple illustrations. The first one is just a reminder on a few of the main asset classes to invest in passively. This is outside of obviously like an active business or active manager of rentals or something like that. If you just want passive investments, stocks are very easy to own. You can buy the S&P 500 and other areas similar. And if we go back ever since 2007, that this chart shows, they've done great over time, to 10.7% on average. Gold actually hasn't done much worse than that, 10.1. The safer ways to invest are things like cash, which is down at the bottom, which has averaged a 1.4%, but obviously is much less volatile. And you can see that upward sloping to the right, that's good. The next illustration, I really like the way this is laid out. This talks about bull and bear markets. Bull markets are when markets are trending up, and bear markets are when obviously the opposite is going on. And what you see there is a lot more blue, a lot more in bull market territory than what you see in bear market territory. And that's why this stuff goes up over time. It's very important when those bear markets happen that you don't panic. And the clients have been with me a while, you've heard me say this, but again, I think it's important to do a fire drill and just realize that these types of dips are normal. And I'm gonna flip to the next illustration now. And it's kind of busy. It goes back to 1970, and it just lists a bunch of bad headlines that have caused temporary drops. Everything from the September 11 terrorist attacks to the 2008 financial crisis when Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy, to COVID-19, to when inflation hit 8 or 9% a few years ago. And actually last year was a perfect example. We had Trump frighten everybody with massive tariffs in March and April of last year, and the S&P 500 went down about 20% from peak to trough between March and April of last year, 2025. But it ended the year up about 17, 18%. So that's a recent example of sort of why you don't want to change the course when this stuff happens. We can't predict it. I would say the number one reason why most individual investors don't get the returns they deserve over a long period of time is not because they picked a Vanguard stock fund versus a Fidelity stock fund, or they're indexing over active management. It's not that. It's their behavior during these sell-offs. You can ruin a lot of progress by locking in gains and selling at the bottom. And I'm going to give you a couple more stats. The next page, it tells you the frequency of declines. So for the S&P 500, which is on the left-hand part of this, we have a 5% or more decline about 3 times a year. We have a 10% or more decline about every 16 months, 15% or more about every 3 years, 20% or more every 5.5 years. So these declines are very normal. And then the last thing I'll go over on the next illustration is it goes back on the numbers to the right, the first column that says date. It shows you the roughly 20 worst one-day returns for the S&P 500. Typically, you get a really bad event like a September 11th or something like that happens. It freaks everybody out. 1987 is the first one. It was actually, they call that Black Monday. It was down 20% just that day. You can go down all these dates, and then the average there is 8.85. But look, 1 year later, up 30%. 3 years later, that's not a total of 13.17. That's an average annual of 13.17. And 5 years later and 10 years later. So a little patience goes a long way. You're gonna want to feel like doing something when all that's happening. But my experience and my advice is just keep your cool, and we'll rebound like all the other ones have. So I thought that was appropriate given that we've just touched on market highs. It's not a prediction, but it's a bit of a fire drill. Hope you learned something, and we'll see you next time.